So we've seen as part of the globalist agenda this divide and conquer technique, trying to divide us among race and among class, among gender, men against women, everybody against everyone. Everyone except getting people to identify by national borders, nationalism. This is the one thing they want to avoid. And one of the ways of atomizing people has been to force them to cover their faces, because it's really hard to make a connection without all the subtle facial expressions. And then whenever someone talks, it sounds like this, and you can't tell what they're saying. And so communication is just brought down to very limited levels. You can see in the UK Supreme Court judge thinks people will be wearing masks and forced to stay home for 10 years. Again, just a potential, but it's the social controls. Once you realize they want us atomized and divided and completely dependent on them, a lot of the world's events all of a sudden start to make sense. He says it's politically unrealistic to expect the government to backtrack now, commented Supton, who has been highly critical of the government's totalitarian lockdown policies. He says an interesting parallel is the continuation of wartime food rationing after the last war. People were in favor of that because they were in favor of social control. So once they get these things, no matter the excuse, they're slow to let them go. I mean, look at the lies that got us into Iraq and Afghanistan. Everybody knows that was made up, and yet here we are 20 years later, still in those locations. Maybe the media and the government and the powers that be lied to us and had some sort of ulterior motive. You know? This Lord Supton also comments that skeptical scientists have been subjected to an extraordinarily unpleasant campaign of personal abuse. No, you don't say. We don't have free, open, and honest discussions. If you can't get people with a slogan, you just attack them. He says, I know a lot of people that would prefer not to put their head above the parapet. From the very moment I started to make these points, I began to get emails from politicians who agreed with what I had to say, but they themselves didn't dare speak out. I think that is a very serious state of affairs. And so it looks like Westerners are going to be forced to rediscover the virtue of moral courage. You've got to put something on the line like this. I know it's a trite saying, but freedom isn't free. Without moral courage, people will just come and take it away. Give me that. I'm your leader now. And not really leader or governor. What they're trying to do is institute themselves as rulers. We elect a government under certain controls with constitutional limitations to govern and represent. But of course, the temptation of being in government is to become a ruler. And they will just keep taking. It's the nature of the rulers to try and rule. You can see this in Merkel, who wanted to. They've already canceled Thanksgiving, they already canceled Christmas and Thanksgiving, I guess. And now she's trying to cancel Easter. But the pushback was so forceful, so powerful, so strong. Not in a violent, aggressive way, just, no, we're not going to back down. She actually canceled the Easter lockdown. So is it scientifically based, or is it agenda-driven? Is it part of this divide and conquer? Why would you have these extraordinarily strict lockdowns to the point of closing all businesses and even supermarkets, right? And all of a sudden, there was intense public backlash. Never mind. Just kidding. Not if it's going to threaten my political power. It doesn't matter after all. That's what people need to be taking away from this. You see, there's a new... What all this force is doing is it's developing a new sort of, I don't want to use the term activist, freedom fighter maybe. Think of all the organization that's taking place to push back against this. There's new leaders. Like we've got people LARPing as Martin Luther King in the race protests of the 60s. But, that's ancient news. That's old. We're not going to be celebrating that for another 100 years. Like, that was a victory. It was a good fight, and it was won through peaceful peaceful action. Now you see there is a new monster out there. Evil never takes the same form twice, at least not in any living memory. And right now it's coming in the form of authoritarian governments who are waging war against their own people. It's the government versus the people. But they want to keep people focused on their little internal fights. They want people fighting each other so that they don't realize, oh my, like it's the government. And when people stand up to their government, they can push back. And it took one day to change Merkel's mind, one day to save Easter. One day. And you can see these protests spreading. Massive anti-lockdown protests are now raging worldwide. Again, a new set of organizers, a new set of protesters, new set of heroes. It was actually very few people that have won the conflicts throughout history. I mean, it took a lot of people with the virtue of moral courage, but as far as very active, very dedicated leadership and organizers, it's just a bare handful of people that make the difference. And as you see these rising worldwide, you're for freedom forming. So, burn your masks. Massive anti-lockdown protests rage worldwide. God, these ads are killing me. And you can't seem to stop them. Thousands and possibly tens of thousands of protesters across Europe marched on Saturday against continued government lockdowns and other pandemic restrictions based on questionable science, which have resulted in mass unemployment, destroyed small businesses, stoked widespread depression and mental illness, and cost taxpayers trillions to keep the whole ship from sinking. There were protests in London, Germany, France, Sweden, the Netherlands, Australia, Belgium, Japan, and Vienna came out for a worldwide rally for freedom. This is very hopeful. This is a very positive sign. People are realizing if they don't stand up for their freedom, it's going to be taken away. In central London, thousands of anti-lockdown activists were seen walking through Hyde Park, chanting, "Stand up, take our freedom back." Like this is a pretty good size rally here. That is a lot of people. So this is the sort of thing that gets the government to say, maybe we don't need to lock down quite so much. This is the sort of thing that changes politicians' mind. Because how do you control that? It would take an army. It would take a literal army, and you can't do that against your own people. So huge lockdown protests in London. Then you can see in Germany they had to use pepper spray on 15 to 20,000 demonstrators. It is huge. You can see that lady looks a little upset, and her partner. Melbourne, Australia, free to speak, free to breathe, came out by the thousands. And then in Paris, the Netherlands, Amsterdam, and even the Japanese, Asians, which are generally pretty favorable to group action, are being pushed to the limit. Communalism. That's a naturally communalistic culture. Austria, huge protests. Belgium. The Belgians are getting angry. What's it take to make Belgium mad? And CNBC is even beginning to admit the 6-foot distancing requirement has probably been the single costliest mitigation tactic we've employed.
The 6-foot distancing requirement has probably been the single costliest mitigation tactic that we've employed as a result of COVID, in response to COVID. And it really wasn't based on clear science. We implemented it early on based on an assumption that coronavirus was going to spread like influenza. And there have been some prior research that flu spread predominantly through droplets. And if you stayed 6 feet apart from people, it reduced droplet transmission. We've subsequently learned that coronavirus is spreading through aerosols, not just droplets. So probably 6 feet isn't as effective as it would be if this was purely droplet transmission. I think the fact that we've over-relied on a flu-based model caused us to underappreciate the role of aerosol transmission. It probably caused us to overestimate contaminated surfaces as a source of spread. It probably caused us to underestimate the utility of high-quality masks in reducing transmission. It probably caused us to overestimate the impact of distancing the 6 feet. We should have re-adjudicated this much earlier. I think there's nothing wrong with having followed that flu-based model and been wrong, but we should have been evaluating this along the way. So CDC did.
Oh, so the CDC's been making mistakes. Well, trust the science. So what do you do in times like these? It seems our institutions can't be trusted, and our governments have declared a silent war on us by atomizing us and destroying the family unit and all cultural and traditional connections. Well, you do things like you celebrate Easter, you celebrate Christmas, you spend time with your family, you work on self-reliance. Do you know how to grow food? Do you know how to defend yourself? And then you can see the power of moral courage. You don't go running out to the front of the charge, Braveheart style, and get impaled on the first spear on the battlefield, but you take responsible action and push back where you can, because it's this virtue of moral courage that minted the heroes of yesteryear, and it's the virtue of moral courage that will mint the heroes of today.